So we've calculated the emission reductions that we can expect to see from each of these priority areas of investment. The emission reduction calculation methodology that we use is the same one that is used by the federal government and by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change per $1 billion of investment. What we're showing in this table is the expected range of emissions reductions that we can see from these types of investments. At the lower end, you see what can be expected in the first few years. Now, because a lot of these infrastructure projects are going to take time to get up to the scale that we need, there is going to be a lag phase, which is why we won't see the higher end of the reductions until much later years, which is really why we need to get started on this immediately, because it is going to take time for us to get the emissions reductions that we need to avert the most catastrophic climate change. Tony mentioned earlier about that we've chosen these priority areas for investment, and you can see in this pie chart the breakdown by Canadian economic sector of where our annual greenhouse gas emissions come from. In the regional documents that we'll be handing out, we've broken down the annual emissions for each province and territory. They vary quite significantly by province and territory, but transportation and buildings are always at the top. Now let's have a look at where we've come from and where we're going. So after decades of inaction on climate change at the federal level, we've seen emissions continue to rise. Emissions would have risen much more significantly if it weren't for the leadership of some provinces developing climate plans during this period. It should also be noted that Indigenous peoples and municipalities have been leading the way on emissions reductions, and many of these actions, including demonstration projects, have laid the groundwork for the types of things that we're suggesting in this plan. This graph also shows 4 emission scenarios for the future. The top red line is where we would be if we did absolutely nothing at all. The second line down shows the higher end of projections from the most recent National Inventory Report from Environment and Climate Change Canada. The purple line, second from the bottom, includes recently announced policies from both the federal and provincial and territorial governments. And there are absolutely some really significant actions that are being taken, but it's evident that they are not enough for us to meet our 2030 target. Further, none of the plans that have come out of the federal government include any measures or provisions to ensure a just transition for workers in carbon-intensive industries, or any measures to assist their communities and families. Now let's look at the green line at the bottom, which is the emissions reductions that we could expect were we to implement this plan in full. If we did this plan, we would not only exceed our 2030 target, we would also be creating 1 million person job years of employment. We should also note that our 2030 target is only a 30% reduction from 2005 levels. The federal government has set an emission target of 80% reduction by 2050, and many prominent scientists are saying that we need to be at carbon zero by 2050. So right now we're putting off a lot of the major actions that we need to be implementing immediately until later years. This is placing an extremely unfair burden on future generations, and a dramatic increase in ambition is required if we are going to be able to solve this problem. If we repeat this plan over the next several decades, we'll be in much better shape in terms of meeting our international obligations for mitigating climate change, and we'll also ensure that we have a fair and equitable future on a livable planet. Thank you.